Alright, today we're making bagels. This wasn't what I intended for video number 2, but I developed a bagel recipe for myself because I wanted some, and they came out so fantastic that I sort of put my other plans on hold because I had to share this. The recipe is extremely easy to scale, and so the first real step is to decide how many bagels you want to make. The gist of the scaling for the recipe is that each bagel should be 100 grams, and you want 2/3 of that to be flour and 1/3 to be water. There's other stuff too, but use that as the basis for your math. I'm going to make 4 bagels today, so 400 grams. 1/3 of that is water, so 133 grams, and 2/3 flour, so 266 grams. We'll start with the warm water, again, 133 grams. To that, we're going to add 15 grams of dark corn syrup, and the correct and precise scaling for this is like a few grams per bagel. Bagel recipes very traditionally call for barley malt syrup, but I don't live in San Francisco or whatever, so my stores don't have that, and probably yours don't either. This is another dark syrup made from grains, so it will work just fine. Traditionalists, once again, do not come for me, you will lose. Anyhow, whisk that in. And then we'll add 8 grams of yeast to this, active, dry, or instant, either one is fine. And then we'll leave this alone for about 10 minutes while the yeast work themselves into a frenzy. 10 minutes later, there's some definite foaming going on around the edges, but I visibly did not actually stir my yeast in, and you should probably do that when you make this. I mean, it turned out just fine, but it's a good habit to get into. Anyways, the flour. We did the math on this like 62 seconds ago, 266 grams of this. And then salt. This is a lean dough, and as I said in the previous video, I like using 3% salt compared to flour in lean doughs, so 3% of 266 grams is like 7 to 8 grams. Don't weigh out your salt like that, by the way. I straight up dumped like 30 grams of salt into a different dough the other day. I refused to learn my lesson. Use a spoon or something to measure your salt out. Anyhow, we're just going to bring this together. It's going to be a very stiff dough. This is by design because 1, it makes the correct bagel texture. But also 2, we're going to cold ferment this dough in the fridge for a couple of days. And like I said in my previous video, when dough ferments, it slackens up. Once you've done pretty much as you can with your spoon or spatula, switch to your hands and knead in the rest of the flour. Do not be tempted to add any more water to this dough. It will take in all of the flour. It does just take it a minute. Now, as you can see, this is a stiff, dry, kind of floury dough. It's not very cohesive right now because, again, the flour hasn't hydrated and gelled, and so this is basically just a clump of damp flour. We're going to cover it and let it sit for anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to hydrate and have some initial rise. 40 minutes later for me, this dough is fairly puffy and much more cohesive. Let me just remove this center mark here. Okay. Anyway, it does not have to achieve a full initial rise here. I'm not really worried about underproving, given that this dough is going to cold proof for literal days. But we do need to develop some very strong gluten here to achieve the correct bagel texture, and so we are going to need this for a while. Seriously, set a timer for 5 minutes, and just go at it. Check for a positive window pane at 5 minutes, making sure to stretch the dough quite slowly while you look for your window pane. This is a lower hydration dough, so just kind of by design, it's not as elastic as, say, an 80% hydration pizza dough. If no window pane is present at the 5-minute mark, go at it for another 2 or 3 minutes and check again, and just repeat that until you get it. There's no real right or wrong way to knead. You just want to make sure that you're actually stretching the dough, really kind of manhandling it. Our dough has passed its window pane test here, and I've just brought it together into a ball. Over here, we have a pan with a pretty generous layer of cornmeal in the bottom. An 8x8 pan is the perfect size for 4 bagels. Speaking of which, go ahead and divide your dough into 4 or however many portions. It really does not have to be exact. Grab a quarter of your dough, bring it together into a ball. and just gradually kind of pinch a hole in the middle. I'm making this look a lot harder than it is because I hate getting dough under my nails, which I wound up doing anyway, so let that be a lesson. Never try. Then you're going to loop it around your fingers, spin it around a bit like you're playing with a rubber band at a staff meeting, stretching it out as you go, getting the hole about 2 or 3 times as large as you want it to be in the end. And folks, we are working very hard to avoid some low-hanging jokes throughout this episode. Anyway, just repeat that process times 3, or however many your heart has told you to make. We're going to stash these in the fridge for anywhere from 36 to 72 hours, and time invested is flavor developed here. Really, you could probably go longer, but I personally haven't, so that's you experimenting if you decide to do that. Cover them tightly, you don't want them drying out in the fridge, and do your best to forget about them for a couple of days. Two days later, this is how mine look. Yours may not have risen as much as mine, and that's perfectly okay. There are a lot of variables here affecting how much the dough will rise in the fridge. If you don't have a lot of rise right now, you almost certainly will in the oven, as long as the yeast you used was good. Here is my layout. Preheat your oven to 500 degrees while you bring 2 quarts or 8 cups of water to a boil. And you do want to measure your water here because we're going to add things to it. Knowing how much water you're using removes a variable if you want to make modifications later. Also have a lightly greased sheet pan on standby. Mine is really throwing off my white balance here, but that's not important to the bagel process. To the boiling water, we're going to add a good few glugs of the dark corn syrup or the barley malt syrup if you cared enough to find some, maybe a 1/4 cup total. And then we're going to add baking soda, anywhere from a tablespoon to probably a max of 1/3 cup, which is what I'm using here. Traditionally, bagels and pretzels are boiled in alkaline water, which greatly improves the browning and gives them that trademark mahogany color. The more baking soda you use, the darker the finished bagel will be. 1/3 cup will get you an almost pretzel-like finish, which I personally am a fan of, but you might not be. And that's just you cooking. And then you're going to add in your bagels top side down, and just 2 or 3 at a time. Don't crowd your pot. Set a timer for 30 seconds, and then you will flip them. Boil for another 30 seconds on the other side. Then you transfer to your sheet pan and immediately top with your choice of toppings. To these first 2, I am going to do garlic powder, freshly grated Parmesan cheese, black pepper, and a spicy pepper flake of your choosing, in this case, Aleppo pepper. Repeat for your next batch of bagels, smooth side down for 30 seconds, flip them, give them another 30 seconds, transfer to your sheet pan, and immediately top. These 2 were topped with a flaky salt, which, when combined with how alkaline the water was, gave an experience very akin to, yet somehow distinct from, a pretzel. These go straight into your oven for 12 to 15 minutes, making sure to rotate the pan halfway through to ensure even browning. And here they are, fresh from the oven. They may look a little too dark here, particularly the salted ones, but that's really just that reflective foil throwing off the white balance. Let me move to some natural light. That is much better. The color is beautiful, and on the crust here you can really see those micro blisters, which is just a disgusting term for what is really a wonderful textural component. And learning from my mistakes, here's some footage of the crumb. You can see that the crust has a light crisp to it, but it's still nice and pliable with a great chew. The interior crumb is springy, bounces back. They're just really everything a bagel should be.